Welcome to the Untold Stories. The radio crackled with panic. Mayday, Mayday, Denver Tower. Engine failure, coming in hot with 43 souls on board. In Hangar 7, a 67-year-old mechanic named Bobby Sullivan looked up from his wrench, and for the first time in 30 years, something dangerous flickered behind those quiet eyes. What happened next would remind everyone that some legends never stop flying. They just change uniforms. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe heroes hide in the most unexpected places, hit that subscribe button. Denver International Airport stretched endlessly under the Colorado sky, a maze of runways and terminals where millions of travelers passed through each year. Most never noticed the mechanics working in the shadows, the men and women who kept the metal birds airworthy and safe. Bobby Sullivan had been one of those invisible workers for 3 decades. Every morning at 5 a.m., he parked his beat-up Ford pickup in the employee lot and walked through the security gates with the same measured pace. His coveralls were permanently stained with engine oil. His toolbox was older than most of the pilots he worked around, and his face carried the kind of weathered lines that spoke of long years and hard choices. The younger mechanics called him Old Bobby with a mixture of respect and pity. The pilots barely acknowledged him at all. To them, he was just another aging worker counting down the days to retirement, someone who fixed their planes without needing conversation or recognition. They had no idea that Bobby Sullivan had once been something else entirely, something that would have made them stand at attention. That morning started like every other. Bobby arrived early, before the first commercial flights began their pre-dawn preparations. He preferred the quiet hours when the hangar belonged to him and the aircraft, when he could work without the constant chatter of younger crews and the pressure of tight schedules. His assignment that day was routine maintenance on a Boeing 737 that would carry passengers to Phoenix in 6 hours. As Bobby ran his hands along the engine housing, checking for stress fractures and loose fittings, he noticed something most people would have missed. A tiny vibration in the mounting bracket, barely perceptible, but wrong nonetheless. He made a note on his clipboard and scheduled additional inspection time. This attention to detail had kept thousands of passengers safe over the years, though none of them would ever know his name. Sarah Martinez arrived at the hangar just after sunrise, her pilot's uniform crisp and her confidence radiating with every step. At 26, she was one of the youngest commercial pilots at Denver International, a distinction she'd earned through skill, determination, and countless hours of flight training. She had dreams of flying international routes, and maybe one day commanding her own crew on the big transcontinental flights. Sarah barely glanced at Bobby as she performed her pre-flight walk-around inspection of her aircraft. To her, he was just part of the airport scenery, like the fuel trucks and baggage carts. She'd never bothered to learn his name or acknowledge the work he did. Her focus was on the sky, on the freedom of flight, on proving herself in a field still dominated by older men, who sometimes questioned whether she belonged there. The weather forecast for the day showed a massive storm system moving in from the west, bringing severe turbulence and dangerous crosswinds. Bobby had seen storms like this before, had flown through conditions that would terrify most modern pilots. But that was a different life, a life he'd left behind when he'd traded his flight suit for coveralls and his cockpit for a hangar floor. Some days he missed the sky so much it felt like drowning. Sarah's flight, United 447 to Phoenix, was scheduled to depart at 2 p.m., well ahead of the storm's arrival. She felt confident about the route, having flown it dozens of times in various weather conditions. The aircraft was in perfect condition, her co-pilot was experienced, and the forecast showed clear skies until they reached Arizona. It should have been a routine flight, the kind that passengers take for granted and pilots execute without drama. As Bobby watched Sarah's plane taxi toward the runway, he felt the familiar mixture of pride and longing that came with seeing aircraft take flight. He'd helped maintain that plane, had personally inspected every critical system, And now it would carry 43 people safely to their destination. It was meaningful work, important work, but it wasn't flying. Nothing could replace the feeling of controlling a machine as it defied gravity. At 2:17 p.m., United 447 lifted off from Denver International Airport and climbed into the afternoon sky. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of takeoff, the moment when tons of metal and fuel transformed into something graceful and airborne. She leveled off at 35,000 feet and settled in for what should have been a smooth 2-hour flight. The storm was still hours away, and Phoenix was reporting perfect landing conditions. Bobby was back in the hangar, working on a different aircraft, when the first emergency call came through. It was 3:43 p.m., and United 447 was 90 minutes into its flight to Phoenix, when Sarah's voice cut through the radio static with words no pilot ever wants to say. Denver Center, United 447 declaring emergency. We have engine failure and are requesting immediate return to Denver International. We need priority handling and emergency equipment standing by. The hangar fell silent as every mechanic, supervisor, and ground crew member stopped what they were doing to listen. Emergency declarations always commanded attention, but this one felt different. The stress in Sarah's voice was barely controlled, and the static-filled updates painted a picture of a situation rapidly deteriorating. Bobby set down his wrench and walked toward the radio console, something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in decades. Denver Tower, United 447. We have lost the number 2 engine completely, and the number 1 is running rough. We're losing hydraulic pressure and have limited control authority. Current position is 60 miles southwest of Denver, descending through 28,000 feet. We have 43 souls on board and approximately 2 hours of fuel remaining. Sarah's training was keeping her voice steady, but Bobby could hear the fear underneath. As the emergency response kicked into high gear, Bobby found himself moving toward the control tower. The younger mechanics looked confused. This wasn't his area, wasn't his responsibility. But something was pulling him forward, some instinct that had been dormant for 30 years, but was now fully awake. He'd heard that tone before, had been in situations where lives hung in the balance, and split-second decisions meant the difference between tragedy and triumph. The Airport Operations Center was buzzing with controlled chaos. Air traffic controllers were clearing airspace. Emergency vehicles were rolling into position, and senior supervisors were coordinating with airline headquarters. Bobby slipped in quietly, his mechanic's coveralls making him nearly invisible among the uniformed officials. He positioned himself near the radio console and listened as Sarah provided updates on her aircraft's deteriorating condition. The aircraft is becoming increasingly difficult to control, Sarah reported, her voice tighter now. We're getting uncommanded rolling motions, and the rudder response is sluggish. I'm not sure we can maintain level flight much longer. Bobby closed his eyes and pictured the aircraft based on her description. He'd seen damaged planes before, had flown them when failure wasn't an option. He knew what Sarah was facing, and he knew what she needed to hear. For the first time in 30 years, Bobby Sullivan stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said quietly to the senior controller. "I'd like to talk to her." The controller looked at him with confusion and annoyance. "Sir, this is a restricted area. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." But Bobby didn't move. Instead, he reached into his wallet and pulled out something he hadn't shown anyone in decades. A faded military ID card that told a very different story. The ID card was worn at the edges, the photograph showing a much younger man in a Navy flight suit. But the name was the same. Robert Bobby Sullivan, United States Navy, Top Gun graduate, combat veteran with over 200 missions in Vietnam. The controller's expression changed from annoyance to shock as he read the credentials. Bobby had been one of the elite, one of the few pilots trusted with the most dangerous missions when failure meant death. "Let me talk to her," Bobby said again, this time with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned the right to be heard. The controller hesitated for a moment, then handed him the microphone. Bobby keyed the mic and spoke in a voice that carried 30 years of suppressed knowledge. United 447. This is Bobby Sullivan in Denver Operations. I'm here to help you bring that bird home safely. Can you give me your exact control inputs and aircraft response? There was a moment of silence on the radio before Sarah responded. I'm sorry. Who is this? Are you a controller? Bobby smiled slightly. No, ma'am. I'm the mechanic who inspected your aircraft this morning. But before that, I flew F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam, and I've brought home aircraft that were far more damaged than yours. Trust me when I say we're going to get you and your passengers on the ground safely. Now, tell me about your control response. The operations center had gone completely quiet. Every person in the room was staring at Bobby Sullivan, the quiet mechanic they'd worked alongside for years without truly seeing. Sarah's voice came back over the radio, stronger now. Bobby, I'm fighting constant left rolling motion. Rudder inputs are delayed, and I'm having to use excessive force on the control column. The aircraft wants to descend and turn left continuously. Bobby processed the information with the instincts of someone who'd faced similar situations when death was the alternative to success. Sarah, you're dealing with asymmetric thrust and partial hydraulic failure. The aircraft is trying to turn toward the dead engine, which is normal. Here's what we're going to do. Reduce power on the good engine to about 60%. Use opposite rudder to control the turning tendency, and don't fight the slight descent rate. But Bobby, if I reduce power, I might not be able to maintain altitude, Sarah replied, the concern evident in her voice. Bobby's response came with the confidence of hard-earned experience. Trust me on this. You're fighting the aircraft instead of working with it. Let it descend gradually while you maintain control. We'll set you up for a long, straight approach that plays to your aircraft's strengths instead of fighting its weaknesses. As Bobby continued to guide Sarah through the technical aspects of flying a damaged aircraft, the other airport personnel began to see him differently. This wasn't the quiet mechanic who fixed their planes in silence. This was a combat veteran who'd faced death in the sky and lived to tell about it. His knowledge wasn't theoretical. It was earned through missions where failure meant not coming home. Every instruction he gave Sarah came from experience, not textbooks. Bobby, I'm starting to feel more in control, Sarah reported 15 minutes later. The aircraft is still damaged, but I understand how to work with it now. What's the plan for landing? Bobby had already worked that out in his mind. We're going to bring you straight in on runway 34 left, the longest runway we have. Emergency equipment will be standing by, but you're not going to need them. You're flying the aircraft, not the other way around. Over the next hour, Bobby talked Sarah through every aspect of the approach and landing. He explained how to compensate for the aircraft's tendency to turn, how to manage the power settings, and how to handle the touchdown with damaged systems. His voice remained calm and authoritative, drawing on decades of experience that most people could only imagine. Sarah absorbed every word, trusting in the quiet confidence of this mechanic who'd become her lifeline. As United 447 appeared on the horizon, trailing a thin line of smoke from the failed engine, Bobby felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years, the satisfaction of bringing someone home safely. Sarah executed the approach exactly as he'd instructed, fighting the aircraft's damaged systems with skill and determination. The landing was firm but controlled, and the aircraft rolled to a stop on the runway without further incident. In the operations center, spontaneous applause broke out as Sarah's voice came over the radio one final time. Denver Tower, United 447, is safely on the ground. All passengers and crew are unharmed. Bobby quietly handed the microphone back to the controller and started to walk away. But the senior supervisor stepped forward. Bobby, wait. How long have you been working here without anyone knowing who you really are? Bobby paused at the doorway and looked back at the room full of people who were seeing him clearly for the first time. 30 years, he said simply. I came here after I left the Navy because I wanted to keep working with aircraft, but I was done with combat. I just wanted to serve quietly, to help keep people safe without anyone needing to know my story. Today was the first time those old skills were needed again. The airport's chief of operations shook his head in amazement. Bobby, you just saved 43 lives. Sarah is one of our best pilots, but she was in over her head with that emergency. Your experience made the difference between a successful landing and a potential catastrophe. How many other people here have backgrounds we don't know about? Bobby smiled. Probably more than you think. Military veterans don't always announce themselves. Sarah Martinez found Bobby later that evening in Hangar 7, where he'd returned to finish his normal duties. She walked up to him with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. Bobby, I owe you an apology. I've worked around you for 2 years and never once bothered to learn your name or acknowledge what you do. I had no idea who you really are. Bobby looked up from the engine he was inspecting and smiled. You weren't supposed to know. That's the point, Bobby continued. I didn't come here to be recognized or thanked. I came here to serve in a different way, to use my knowledge to keep aircraft safe and people alive. Today just happened to be one of those rare times when the old skills were needed directly. Most of the time, the best service is the kind that goes unnoticed. Sarah nodded, understanding for the first time the depth of sacrifice that true service required. Over the following weeks, word spread quietly through Denver International Airport about Bobby Sullivan's background. Pilots who had previously ignored him now stopped to talk, asking about his experiences and seeking his advice on technical matters. Younger mechanics requested stories about his military service, eager to learn from someone who'd flown in combat. But Bobby remained largely unchanged, still arriving early and working with the same quiet dedication. Have you ever overlooked someone who turned out to be extraordinary? Someone whose quiet competence masked decades of incredible experience? Share your story in the comments below. The truth was that Bobby preferred his anonymity. Recognition made him uncomfortable, and he deflected most attempts to celebrate his heroism. He'd done his job, nothing more, nothing less. The fact that his job had once involved flying fighter jets in combat was irrelevant to his current mission of keeping. Commercial aircraft safe. Sarah became a regular visitor to Hangar 7, not just for required maintenance, but to learn from Bobby's vast experience. She discovered that his knowledge of aircraft systems was encyclopedic, gained through years of flying planes to their absolute limits and beyond. He taught her things about aviation that no flight school had covered, practical wisdom earned through missions, where textbook answers weren't enough to survive. Months later, when reporters tried to interview Bobby about the emergency landing, he politely declined. Sarah Martinez is the hero of that story, he insisted. She's the one who kept her composure and executed a difficult landing. I just provided some technical guidance based on experience. The real heroes are the people who do this job every day without expecting recognition. His humility only made his colleagues respect him more deeply. Bobby Sullivan continued working at Denver International Airport until his retirement at age 70, maintaining aircraft with the same meticulous care that had saved Sarah's flight. On his last day, the airport presented him with a small ceremony recognizing his service. He accepted graciously but briefly, more comfortable with wrenches than with speeches. He'd served his country in war and in peace, in the cockpit and in the hangar, always putting others before himself. Bobby Sullivan never wanted recognition. He never sought praise or thanks. He just wanted to serve, to use his extraordinary skills in service of others' safety. But sometimes the greatest pilots aren't the ones in the cockpit. They're the ones making sure everyone else can fly safely. If this story moved you, subscribe to the Untold Stories. We find the legends hiding in plain sight, one story at a time. And remember, Next time you see someone working quietly in the background, you might be looking at a hero you never knew existed. Because the most powerful stories aren't always about those who seek the spotlight. They're about those who choose to serve in silence, using their gifts to protect and guide others from the shadows. This is the Untold Stories, where ordinary people reveal extraordinary pasts, and heroes never stop serving. They just change uniforms.